Well, hello to everyone out there, and specifically Memorial, and those that tune in to Memorial. It is Tim Rush and myself, Jason Thornton, and here is our post-sermon conversation for uh, what was it, March 7th? Yes. So it seems so long ago, yesterday.
Right, right.
Uh, so Tim was talking about greed, the focus on greed, and this is in our ongoing Lion versus Lion series with the specific focus of the devil. How does the devil attack us? What are his tactics, and how do we become shrewd as serpents and gentle as doves and join God in this fight? So kind of catch us up or remind us kind of the focuses that you were targeting there.
Yeah, so we started with 1 Corinthians 13:11, uh, looking at greed from the view of, as a child, what was greed protecting me from? And I talked about the idea of scarcity, how it would be natural, and there's always a difference between the natural and the spiritual, but it would be very natural for a child to become greedy when they have this sense of I've got to protect myself. I have needs that aren't being met. I always worried, am I watering it down too much by giving a silly illustration of the French fries? But that's where we went, and then um, stepped into. But what about when my greed isn't about objects or things, but it's about my own energy, my own? I'm greedy for my self preservation because I'm a 9 on the Enneagram, and that's a scarcity. I think it always comes out like in Susan Stabile talks about fives and how they budget their own social interaction because they know that there's a scarcity of what they have to offer, and they're careful to keep control of it. But then when they talk about nines, they always mention nines have the least energy of anybody, and they never talk about it like they do fives, but they always mention they have the least energy of anybody. And it dawns on me as I listen to it of, yeah, I do that. I budget what will I give to people of myself because I've been there where I didn't have anything left and something was expected. And it makes me like, I don't know if it's a social anxiety, but I feel this. This is too much. This is too much. I need to not be here now. And you experience that a couple of times, and you start to be careful and budget. But then we looked at the Philippians 4 passage of I can do all things through Christ. And I really wanted to not take that out of the context of the gospel message, where this is now the solve, this is now the trump card of anything but Christ strengthens me. And we remove that from the context of we still have to count the cost. We will still have to pay a price, because I think sometimes I've done that where, but Christ will strengthen me, and in the end I have to pay a price, and I feel like, but He was supposed to strengthen me. Um, yeah, and then we went back to, so what about our, what if it is things, what if it is finances that we feel greedy around, and whether it's social or finances, how can we move the ball forward 5 yards and challenge ourselves to just lean into, I know I struggle here, I know this is a weakness, but what can I do to challenge myself to give a little bit more in that area where it's hard for me, whether it's finances or social interaction? Nutshell,
Man,
bam.
yeah, that was a tremendous nutshell. I have 4 hours of content I now want to share with you about what you said. I first, I love going through this series with you. Um, the beautiful thing is we've talked about these lessons for a while. We have a general sense of where they go, but I am always surprised by how you work with the content. And to be able to discuss, I just want to pause and just give glory to God that we're at a church that we can talk about greed and gluttony and lust and sloth and not feel accused. Now, I'm
Mm.
not suggesting no one feels accused, but certainly the spirit of being able to look at it and make wise decisions about the way the devil attacks us, I think that is just beautiful. And honestly, I've never experienced it in this way before. And so, people, they don't ask it as much anymore. When we first took this role together, they were like, so who's the preacher? And I'm like, we are the preacher. And they're like, does not compute, you know. But man, one of the things that's so beautiful is no matter how much we discuss something beforehand, when you get up and speak, it's amazing to me. I mean, I'm like, oh, I never thought about it from that way. And it's evidence of the Holy Spirit involved in our lives, but it is such an encouraging, nurturing, empowering dynamic to be able to listen to that and think, I've thought about greed and I've asked God a lot about it over the years, but yet I still got a new look. And that just keeps me open to the wonder of God, the way that you handle that, the way you handle sloth. But I just think, man, that it's just a real privilege for me.
Well, there's something that you've said recently that to me feels like um, it's been. I feel like this has been something we've been trying to communicate for a while, and you put it into words recently about this, and now I'm losing it. This thing that I struggle with does not separate me from God. And there was something about how you said it that it helped me realize, oh, that has been a part of my thinking that has kept me from looking at greed, sloth, lust. And so I feel like you'll probably have to say it 10 more times. But I feel like that's the path we're on at Memorial, that we can step in to look at these things and go, yeah, it's a struggle, it's a sadness, it's a whatever, but it's not a separation. It's not the trump card. It's not Satan winning. If anything, by um, speaking it, we talked about this last week, or a couple weeks ago, the Mr. Rogers quote, if it's mentionable, it's manageable, that we're stepping into that. It's okay to say, this is my shortcoming. This is my struggle. And without the sense of, and God no longer accepts me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I like that. And I just want to, one thing Terry was so good at, your dad was so good at, was saying, can we pause for a moment and cherish right now? He would never use the word cherish, but isn't right now so good? Isn't it so beautiful? Because I believe God, there is a dynamic that's really clear in scripture. You're not going to find it if you're not seeking it.
Mm.
So if you are not seeking to find the glory of God in your life and the wonder and the awe, you won't find it. Now, he may send stuff to you that's almost undeniable, like Jesus did in the presence of the Pharisees and the apostles. But they had a choice whether they'd even see that, you know? And I think that's really important that we have this ongoing awareness. My free will matters, and how I yield my free will and what is it I'm looking for is so important. Okay, so I could go with that for all day, but I want to talk. There were several things that jump out at me. One is scarcity. And I love that picture. Everything you struggle with, and you've been such a good teacher on this to me, everything you struggle with started somewhere.
Mm.
You have different sin struggles. Part of it may be genetic and built in. And we talk about Enneagram numbers. And if you're not familiar, listeners, to Enneagram, the difference between Enneagram and a lot of personality assessments is it's not talking about what's going on outside of you. It's talking about almost totally what's going on inside of you. What are your motivations?
Yeah.
And it's not God. It's just a tool. But man, it's been a great tool for us to see ourselves more clearly, so we know what to offer to God.
Yeah.
It's just been a beautiful tool. Um, but the idea of that coming, of all of our sin comes from somewhere. It's not that removes our guilt. It simply helps us to understand what's pushing our buttons, so that we can work with God to resist the devil. And I think with scarcity, I'm reminded of Paul saying, I've learned what it is to be content in every situation. I've learned what it is to be with plenty and with nothing or little. And I think that's really important. There is, he's saying, if you have plenty, give glory to God. And if you have little, give glory to God, because both of them can speak to your heart. And so it's not that we want to deny that I have a scarcity mentality.
Yeah.
I want to yield it to God to allow, and I don't decide, I don't say, I'm just not going to have a scarcity mentality. I say, God, I have a scarcity mentality. Will you lead me to contentment in that mentality, to overcome that mentality. And I think that is just a really helpful way for me to think about that. How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, yeah. That's sorry, I was jumping ahead there, but yeah, I do think this is just teaching us how to ask God and how to look at it from His view. Sorry, when you went to that place of I have been in need and I have been in abundance, it made me think of living in Guadalajara, in the apartment where you and Heather came to visit us. I think y'all came down to do a wedding. Um, we had a period of 4 days where we had friends of Kim's in our home, and we had our little house church in our home. Friends of Kim's were some of the richest people in Guadalajara, and our house church was in the barrio of Guadalajara. And on Wednesday, we were embarrassed of what the wealthy people would think of our home. And on Sunday, we were embarrassed of what the poor would think of our home. And so we lived in the exact same house. And on Wednesday, we knew what it was to be in want. And on Sunday, we knew what it was to be in abundance. Nothing changed there, but our perspective by who was walking in and who was looking at what we owned. Yeah, so it's fascinating just to be able to step in next to God and ask for His perspective on all of this.
Yeah, and see, this is the thing. I think I was with somebody this last week, and they were saying I didn't accept grace. My community of faith didn't accept grace growing up. We had a yardstick, and it said if you now he said yardstick, and then he switched to grade card, so he was mixing his metaphors. But he was like, even if I had a D minus, at least I knew I had a D minus, you know. And now it's like in grace, I'm like, I don't know where I stand. And see, this is what God is trying to break us of, is
Mm,
dependence on our perception. And our perception is limited. We only have access to this very moment.
yeah,
Like, I guarantee you, if we were to say, what are you going to do the rest of the day? And then 1 second later, I have a heart attack, our day's plans would be
yeah,
different. You know what I mean? If a meteor hits, in downtown Tulsa, our days will be different, you know. So we have this presumptuous, and it's not necessarily sinfulness, although we want to look at James and be careful what you say about the future. Um, but it's this idea that we know, and the truth is we don't know, and God built it that way.
yeah.
If God wanted us to have easy access to all the information in the world, He would have given it to us. He's got the power, but he chooses not to.
So um, I, I think it's fascinating that X amount of months ago, we could have easily been asking, why aren't we building yet? Why aren't we rebuilding at 747? We're going to come to the end of the pandemic. Why haven't we started? And had we started, we would be in trouble now. We would be in a place where what we were quoted is no longer truth. Um, Construction prices have skyrocketed. So we feel grateful that we look back and we go, okay, we were following the cloud and we were doing what God wanted. And I believe that is 100% true. But then I also ask myself, where is it that we say follow the cloud, but what we mean is I don't want to make decisions? Like, how is it that following the cloud protects us? And I'm saying this as a nine who does not want to make decisions because I don't want to make the wrong decision. And so man, it feels like an impossible journey to sit in God's perspective all the time and say, God, are we following you, or are we protecting ourselves by blaming it on you? And it is a constant, there's no precedent. There's no way of saying, well, that's what we did last time. So it is a constant. Okay, God. Okay. So now I'm getting preachy, but in Proverbs, when it talks about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all knowledge. And I really think that fear of the Lord means being in His presence, like that. It's wrapped up in awe and crazy awe that only comes by being in His presence. So the beginning of wisdom in all of this is going back into his presence and saying, okay, I know this is what we said yesterday, or I know this is what we said 5 minutes ago, but we just have to sit here, God, and our awe of you can be our only correct response in all of this.
Yeah, and I would say when you go to God, it's not a progress report, it's not a pop quiz. It's seeking to abide in him, to trust in him fully, to put your full weight on him with the things that scare you, with the things that you believe will offend him, with the lessons he's taught you a million times over and you still haven't got, with the sin that you've committed not to commit a million times and now you call it habitual and you wonder, are you going to have that the rest of your life? He is not saying, now where are you? Number one, he already knows where you are. He wants you to, I just always go back to the prodigal son. When the prodigal son returns, his motivation was garbage. He was still trying to control the narrative. Even saying I'm a slave, he's in charge. I'll be your slave. You know what I mean? He had there was not even remorse there. I wouldn't even say there's guilt. There was just pure desperation. And the father said, whoa, 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 where you been? Pop quiz. Quote me 7 verses out of the New Testament and 1 out of the Old. How's your daily Bible reading? He wraps him up in his love so deeply that all of that nonsense that he brought to the table disappears.
Yeah.
It just disappears. And I think we believe that's a one-time thing, that if you have a really bad life and come back to God, but there is nothing in scripture to suggest that's a one-time thing. You know, and I think about this. You talk about the idea of trying to stay in God's presence permanently. In Psalm chapter 1, where he says, you know, blessed is the man who does not sit in the seat of mockers and that dynamic. And then later he says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and he meditates on it day and night. So David is saying, first Psalm out the box, he's saying, a true man of God meditates on it day and night. So then you watch David's life and you're like, well, maybe when you were a shepherd, but as soon as you got some power, you were not meditating on that day and night. I mean, you show lots of evidence not meditating. And so the ideal is you meditate, you stay in his presence day and night. But the reality is, will you be like David, that he didn't have the heart of God, but he kept after the heart of God?
Yeah.
He kept asking God. And part of that's believing, no matter how messed up I am in this moment, God wants me in his presence to be, yes, overwhelmed by his power and his majesty and I have no right to be here, his sovereignty, but also his deep love for us that makes us safe in all that power.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend that is struggles with addiction. And the story I tell myself is that he will always struggle with addiction, that it will always be at his door beckoning. But I also tell myself the story, he will always struggle. Like he's not given up. He's not given in. He's moved close to suicide at times. He's moved close to leaving his family. I think he's moved close to murder. Like it's been a struggle, but he's not, he will keep struggling. And I look at him and I think, man, that's the picture of he's not walking away. He will continue to seek after the heart of God. And I feel proud of him and I feel encouraged. And I look at his family and go, my goodness, he's a man of peace. Look at how his children are growing up so differently than how he grew up. At the same time, when it comes to me, I don't have that grace. You know, that would not be a grace-filled story for myself. Yeah. So how does God do that? That he gives us mirrors in different places where we can see grace, honor grace. And so it feels like, okay, so I'm living the same story of looking for grace. And I will maybe always struggle with that. Like maybe that will always be my journey, that the best I can say is I'm not giving up. I will keep going for it. But even in that, I think it's beautiful that God doesn't say, well, you're not getting it right, so I'm moving on from you. He's okay. You're seeking my heart. So I'll stay with you.
Well, and I think if we were to really unpack James 1, 2, you know, consider it pure joy, and you made the point last year almost at this time, this is an accounting term. It's not feel joy, it's counted joy. That right there is not giving up.
Mhm.
When I'm in the middle of garbage and I hate it, and my only prayer is that it would end. I mean, there have been times I'm like, even my death would be preferable to enduring this, you know. Um, God is asking me, He's saying, I get it. I get you feel that way. And He gets it because He gets us. And I think we don't think He gets us, you know, but He gets us. The question always is, will you still hang on? That's counting it pure joy. You know, that's not feeling joy. It's not feeling good about it. It's not wanting it to last. It's saying, God, I believe you're going to do something. It's a corollary to Jesus being on the cross because of the joy set before him. He wasn't experiencing joy. He wanted it to end, but he counted it joy, you know, and then that leads to perseverance. Well, what is perseverance except not giving up? You know, it's this cycle of a new thing. And if God is anything, he is unprecedented. God does nothing the same twice. It makes no sense to me why he doesn't do a Pentecost in every city. Wouldn't that just be a winner? It's worked. If we were in charge of church, we'd do a Pentecost in every city. He does one Pentecost. What a waste of a good technique. What a waste of a good methodology. You know, he does it once and then he does it different every place he goes. And some of them, I just think Paul must be in heaven going to Peter, like, you had it so easy. I preached, I got stoned. I preached, I got beaten. I preached, I got flogged. You preached, 3,000 people are baptized. Like Paul never had a Pentecost, you know? And that's God. He's unprecedented because he knows as soon as we set precedent, we trust precedent, we depend on on precedent, and we stop trusting him. And his question is, do you love me enough to stay with me? Especially when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And we think, yeah, that's good. But what he really wants is our perfection. And he's like, I've already told you failed. Like,
Yeah.
what more do I need to tell you here?
Man, that's right. The story I tell myself is he's not really happy. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I want to go down a different road here. So in this got me thinking. Our Sunday morning discussion after the sermon, somebody used this. I can't remember if it's your exact words, but somebody used this definition of greed: anything I'm holding back and not giving to God.
Hmm.
There, and I think the best way to say it is there's a high possibility that I'm greedy for that.
Mm.
Anything I'm holding back and not giving to God. I don't know. How does that resonate with you? How would you adjust that?
I don't know how I would adjust that. That sounds really good. It's not my words, so it sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Okay, so where does that could show up in a lot of places?
Yeah. And one thing that's helpful to me, and I felt you did a good job with this yesterday, of when we contrast these different attack patterns of the devil. So this is how sloth will impact you. And obviously, and this is true, self-control is never one size fits all. So the way you combat sloth, it will be different than the way I experience and combat sloth. The common thread is we're both tempted towards it, you know. But the idea of being able to say this is the difference between lust, which is this craving and a passion for something, and this is the difference. And greed is something I'm holding back to God because I don't trust him.
Hmm.
You know, so those are different drivers. Whereas gluttony is I have something, but then I just can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
Like it becomes I'm completely insatiable, you know. And so noticing these edges, they all overlap, of course, because when I'm experiencing lust, it is so likely for me also to experience a certain kind of greed,
Mm.
you know, or a certain kind of gluttony, you know.
Yeah.
So they all overlap, but to find those edges helps me to recognize, oh, that's how it gets to me. You know, people on this got me thinking yesterday. We're reflecting through all of these tactics. We're talking about, man, it was so nebulous before. I didn't even know how to focus on it, you know. And now that we're defining it better, it's like, oh man, that really empowers me to lean into, okay, God, this is how the devil's tripping me up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good because it has sometimes I feel like, okay, these are words we're putting on it. That and we Christendom uh for a couple thousand years have separated into the seven deadly sins, which if you look in the Bible, there's not a list that says these are the seven deadly sins. So sometimes especially when I am trying to differentiate. I think, are we even supposed to differentiate? But then, like whenever you put them in their lane, then it does feel like, yeah, okay, so of course we don't need to create something legalistic about this, but it does help us to put things into words. Like that's the weird thing about language. It helps us when we can put it into words and hold on to, okay, this is what we're talking about. This is where it shows up in my life. This is how I show up in my life. Um, yeah, yeah. So I'm rambling there.
No, I think it's gold. And I think it's like a medical diagnosis. You go to your doctor, I feel weird. Well, tell me more. I hurt. Well, where do you hurt? I hurt here. Is it this kind of pain or that kind of pain? You know what I mean? And the more that you can roll with that, the more specific you're going to get. Now, this is the thing. Where it falls off is you give it to the doctor and the doctor prescribes medicine and you don't have to be engaged anymore other than taking what he gave you. With God as the great physician, what happens is as he leads you, and this is him leading you, it's not you discovering something. He knows the depth of your sin and the
Yeah.
specifics of it. But when you're open to submit your free will to think it through and ask him and say, well, show me, then that allows you to have more information about seeing it in real time. So let me say this. I would lust and then I'd have guilt later about lusting. You know what I mean? And now, because I've specified what is it that draws me into lust, you know what I mean? And I've kind of detailed that in my own head. I can see it coming a lot more.
Mm.
I turn to God so much quicker now than I used to
Yeah.
because I see it now as spiritual attack and not just me seeking momentary comfort, because I feel insecure or whatever's going on there. And so this is the power of this is it's not to create something apart from God, it's to turn to God quicker. That's why our first rule of engagement is be aware that this
Beware.
is
Yeah.
spiritual, you know. Hey, go ahead if you've got something there.
No,
I
no, go
wanted
ahead.
to redirect. Okay. So here's something that's very interesting that came up in the conversation yesterday is my view is in the church I grew up in, I'm not talking about one congregation, in all the churches I grew up in, if you imagine the pendulum, there's this dynamic that you have to say yes to everything the church asks you, or you're not a faithful Christian, you're not going to heaven. Okay. As pendulums go, you don't go to a balance point, you go way over here. And I feel like now we're in a generation that saying no is a mark of pride.
Mm.
We just say no to everything. And so that neither of these is right, you know. So the question comes, how do you figure out what to say no to? And how do you not just develop an identity around saying yes or saying no? That how do you process through that? And I'm just curious. I mean, this is a pop quiz, but how does that hit you?
Man, so I don't know if this is a good answer, but when you were talking about lust, um, one of the things I landed on was the thing that helps me the most consistently is asking myself, what is it that I want right now? And that helps me step back and gain perspective and realize, okay, what I really want right now is connection or whatever it lands on. And it can be different things at different times. But I think that comes into play here also when people are asking for your time. Um, Man, it is so hard to live in perspective. But if I am a yes man or if I am a no man, uh, what is it that I want for myself by saying that? And my wishes and my desires aren't king here. Uh, Jesus ought to be king in this situation, but by not even paying, Paul tells Timothy, pay attention to your life and your doctrine. And so if I'm paying attention to my life, it's good to know what's the driver. Am I saying yes because I want to have the image of being a hard worker? Or am I saying yes because I just want to please everybody? Or am I saying yes because I just don't want to disappoint? Or why am I saying no? Am I saying no because I'm selfish? Am I saying no because I don't want people to think they can push me around? Am I saying no because like these things are endless? But whenever I can gain perspective, then I can answer from truth of, you know what? These things can be separated out. And where is it that Christ would lead me this time? Not because of the identity I want to have, or because I want to please, or I want to be seen as my own man, yeses and nos, um, but stepping into, hey, Jesus, is this for me? Um, Almost all of the things that we're asked are good things. That may or may not be true. We are constantly asked about good things, um, but are they what God is calling for us to use our time in?
I think that's 100% where my head goes. Somebody mentioned a woman at the well. Jesus is clearly tired. He sent the guys in for food. He's resting by the well. I mean, this is a whole setup. He's
Yeah.
resting by the well. And this woman comes, and if you're low on energy, you don't want to start a conversation with a stranger. You know it's going to be weird, and yet he does. And there's a time where, he's really tired and he's asleep in a boat and he gets awakened and he calms the storm, which we focus on the miracle, but there's also that social dynamic that he was exhausted, and didn't want to do anymore. So much so, I always wonder if they didn't wake him up, would they be underwater and all of a sudden we'd have a new miracle of how they could breathe underwater? What's God going to do with that? But anyway, there are just these times where he's tired and yet still leans in and still heals people. So one would take from those examples, you just got to keep giving no matter what. Well, then you also have to say, John the Baptist fundamentally is reaching out to Jesus to say, are you going to save me from prison? And Jesus said, no. A whole town had come to Jesus on one night. He gets up early the next morning. They are all looking for him. And he says, no, we're leaving, you know? And so this is that dynamic. The thing that set Jesus apart was not that he was sin free. I mean, that's a huge part of who he is and why he is a worthy sacrifice. But what set him apart as a human was he was so in touch with God.
Mm.
He leaned on God. He says, and I think it's John 6, he goes, I don't do anything unless the Father tells me to, which means he is constantly seeking to be in God's presence. And part of the key to this is he believed God wanted him there.
Yeah.
He believed God accepted him there. He believed that was the right answer when you knew what to do and when you didn't know what to do. And I mean, we look at Jesus like he's perfect, and he absolutely was. But if we knew a man or a woman who was organizing something for God, and they had at one point they had drawn thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people, and then they could barely get their own inner circle to hang on, we'd say that's a failed ministry.
Yeah.
And yet Jesus wasn't consumed with that. He just kept listening to God. God, you give me 10,000 people. Okay. You give me one person. Okay. Because he was so satisfied with God, and he believed that God was for him, that God was with him. And that to me is the big gap in most of our lives is when I believe you love me, Tim, and you accept me, I lean more into that relationship. But if I believe for whatever reason that I'm kind of on the line with you, I lean away. And that's what I see Christians doing. We pull away from God. And ironically, the more we learn about God, the more we're tempted to pull away because we recognize how sinful we truly are.
Yeah.
And
I
God's like,
think
lean in.
I think so much of this comes down to listening to God, going back into his presence, and we feel it when we are in that situation where it is evident that now I need God. I'm changing career, I'm looking at a large life choice. My children are moving away. Um Man, then we want to hear from God, and we want to know what's the right decision, what is best. And if we wait for that moment to begin practicing the presence of God, to begin practicing listening to God, it is so hard to hear him then. And so that's why it's so important, even when we don't feel like we're at that crossroad, or we're at this is the situation, um, to listen to him in our daily going abouts and paying attention.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And we just have to keep as a community of faith, and with anybody anybody listening has influence over, is we have to turn down the messages of the devil. That's tactics, all of these sins we're talking about. The way he gets to us is the messaging,
Yeah.
like scarcity, for example, is you're never going to have enough. You got to look out for number one. I even heard a quote last night, the Gordon Gecko, the Wall Street, whatever that movie was, where he says greed is good and greed clarifies and greed does all this. And I'm like, yeah, if scarcity is true, if you don't have access to an abundant life, that makes perfect sense. It's very natural to be
Yeah.
greedy. But God is saying, I get that you understand natural. Will you believe the supernatural? Will you believe that I can sustain? I had an experience once, and it's just popped in my head. I was preparing my only full sermon I did in Ecuador. And it was 4 pages of memorization of Spanish words. And I spoke Spanish decently, but it was a whole different dynamic, to be in front of this church and to be able to deliver a sermon and wanting it to have power. And so I was memorizing like a madman. And I thought, okay, I've got this one last block. It's like Saturday night at 5 o'clock. And I'm like, I got the whole evening to really hammer this down. And I knock on the door. And his name was Ramiro. And Ramiro was heartbroken, like he was in tears. And I've never seen him cry before or since, never seen him cry. But his girlfriend had broke up with him. And he was distraught. And my first thought was, God, you're ruining my life. Like, who can I call and what can I say? And it's funny because I couldn't say, well, I don't speak Spanish well enough to help you. I'm about to speak a Spanish or preach a Spanish sermon the next day, And so it's like, okay, God, you gave this to me and I'm here. And so here we go. So I spent, I don't know, 3 hours with him, just helping him see. And at the end of the day, he was okay. And it was just a beautiful thing. And then I was exhausted, but I thought, I'm just going to give this about 30 minutes. And all of a sudden, I think I was probably I think I was probably an hour and a half in and realized, oh my gosh, I have energy again.
Hmm.
It was just really weird. That is not a unique experience for me, where I feel like I have no energy to do this. Something pops up from God. I lean into it and suddenly I do. Now I'm an extrovert, but that's not a dynamic of another person energizing me, which is a key operation of an extrovert.
Yeah.
I believe that's the spirit following through. And a lot of times we go ahead and make decisions about what God's going to do in the future. And then we calculate and we make our strategy based on that.
Yeah.
We don't allow for resources we don't know about.
It's crazy. As you're telling that story, I can identify with pieces of it. But so I'm asking myself, have I told myself those stories? Or do they happen and I call them outliers or one-offs? And so I don't own how God rescued, God provided, God gave what was needed. And since I don't tell the stories, it's like they didn't happen. They are outliers and they are one-offs. Whereas if I would repeat the story and share it, it becomes a part of my history, and it becomes a part of my, hey, this is what God does.
Right. And that's a good question, is why don't I? I'm reminded of your dad telling the story about Wendy buying a car.
Mhm.
And I don't remember all the details now, but it was a really by faith, proactive walk with the Spirit on this. And he told the story maybe at workshop and had at least one person really be critical. And basically the guy was like, you can't set precedent is the thing. And the answer I would say is, yeah, I'm not setting precedent. You're setting precedent,
Yeah.
because the fear is, if you relate a story that worked for you and it doesn't work for me, then I won't believe in God. And the underlying message is God designed you differently, so he's going to work with you differently. It's not accurate to think because God worked with Jonah this way, or Abraham or Miriam or Tim or whoever, then he'll work with me the same. Every single, and this is something, man, oh, I hate that we homogenize all the stories in the Bible and make it one big story. In terms of God reached each individual different. He used different technique with Joshua than David, than Esther, than Solomon. He used different technique with every single person. And yet when I hear your story, I'm like, well, then my technique needs to be that way too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what we're saying is, be open to the glory of God, even if it doesn't show up the way that it showed up for me.
Yeah. I'm thinking now of Dad this last week posting a story on Facebook of somebody who he met in the parking lot. And he shared baseball card with.
Right.
And the consistency here is dad keeps telling stories and dad keeps looking for the new story to take place. And I think it's just fascinating, the perspective that he has because he keeps looking.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Terry Rush is a great example of a man who walks with the living God and he finds because he seeks.
Mhm.
And I have to ask myself, if I'm not finding, is it possibly because I'm not seeking?
Yeah.
You know? And I think that's really, it doesn't matter about your personality or your struggle. That's the underlying factor is, are you asking God, God, what do you have for me today? How can I be open to that? And trusting he wants to share it with you.
Yeah.
Well, very good. I'm appreciative. Great job on the sermon. And next week is
Anger.
anger. Oh, I
Man,
look forward to that.
I was so angry this weekend. I was wishing I was preaching about anger this weekend, and it's probably best that I wasn't. And I felt so angry. So we'll see how that goes.
I I am eyes wide open with this because yeah, it's something that it's like I feel like it's part of my family heritage to be angry. Like I feel like it stretches back for multi generations, and really give into that. And so I was just having a conversation with my mom last night about that dynamic in our family makeup, and I don't think we're unique. But I look forward to what God gives you because that's going to be good stuff. Good stuff.
We will see.
All right.
All right.
By faith. All right, brother. Thank you.